It all started on a quiet Sunday morning, the kind where everything seems peaceful on the outside, but deep down, you know something's about to change. I was sipping coffee at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone, half listening to the sound of cartoons playing in the next room. My stepson, Ethan, had just turned 11. He was at that age where one minute he's moody and distant, and the next he's hugging you out of nowhere. We'd been through a lot together, him and I. When I married his father 2 years ago, I wasn't just becoming someone's wife. I was stepping into the shoes of a full-time stepmom, and nothing prepares you for that. The early days were rough. Ethan didn't speak much to me at first. He kept his distance, always careful, always watching. I never pushed. I knew he had already lost a lot, and I didn't want to be just another person passing through. Slowly, over time, he began to trust me. It started with little things like asking me for help with homework or leaving his drawings on the fridge. But I never expected what happened next. That morning, Ethan walked into the kitchen holding something behind his back. He was grinning, the kind of grin that usually meant trouble or a surprise or both. I raised an eyebrow, playing along, and asked, "What are you up to, kid?" He just shrugged and said, "Nothing. Just thought I'd give you something." He pulled out a folded piece of paper, handed it to me, and sat down, watching my reaction like his life depended on it. I opened the paper, expecting a doodle or maybe a silly joke. But instead, I saw a list. A handwritten list titled, "Ways to Keep You Smiling." My heart skipped a beat. It had things like do the dishes without being asked, let you pick the movie, and give you a hug when you're sad. And at the very bottom, in bold letters, it said, "I'd do anything to keep you smiling." I looked up at him, and before I could say a word, he said, "You've smiled more lately, and I want to make sure you keep smiling. You make this house feel like home." I didn't know what to say. It was one of those moments that completely knocks the air out of your lungs. It wasn't just a sweet gesture. It was a glimpse into how much he'd grown, how much he'd let me in. But there was something else in his eyes. Something unsure. Like he was bracing for a reaction, or maybe hiding something deeper. That's when I realized there was more to this story than just a sweet note. Something had changed. Something was bothering him. And as I looked closer, I noticed the tiredness in his face, the way he kept glancing toward the hallway, like he was expecting someone, or trying to avoid them. And then he said something that chilled me, but I need to tell you something first, before Dad finds out. What he said next changed everything. I froze for a second, still holding the note in my hands. My mind raced through a dozen possibilities, each one worse than the last. Ethan wasn't the type of kid to stir up drama just for attention. If he said something was wrong, it usually was. He looked down at the floor, his fingers fidgeting with the sleeve of his hoodie, and I could tell whatever he was about to say had been weighing on him for a while. "What is it, Ethan?" I asked gently. "You can tell me anything, you know that." He hesitated, biting his lower lip the way he always did when he was nervous. Then he looked up at me with eyes that seemed way too old for someone his age. "It's about Dad," he said quietly. "He's been different lately." That hit me harder than I expected. I'd noticed it too. My husband, James, had been acting strange for a couple of weeks now, coming home later than usual, distracted during dinner, short-tempered with little things. At first, I chalked it up to work stress, maybe some project that was keeping him busy, but now hearing Ethan say it, it didn't feel like just stress anymore. "What do you mean, different?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Ethan shrugged, still avoiding my eyes. "He's been locking his office door more. He doesn't let me in like he used to. And sometimes I hear him talking to someone, but there's no one else in there. That sent a chill down my spine. James did have a home office, and it wasn't unusual for him to take calls, especially with his job, but locking the door? Whispered conversations. That was new. Do you think he's hiding something? I asked softly. Ethan nodded slowly. I think so. I tried to ask him about it, but he got really mad. Like, really mad. And he told me not to bring it up again. He looked back at me, a little scared now. That's why I made the list. I wanted you to be happy, just in case something happens. His voice cracked on those last words, and I felt my heart break a little. This wasn't just a kid trying to be sweet. This was a kid trying to protect me from something he didn't fully understand. And the way he said, just in case, made it clear that he was afraid of what might come next. I pulled him into a hug, and he clung to me tighter than he had in a long time. I didn't have any answers yet, but I knew one thing for sure: Ethan had seen or heard something that scared him. And he didn't feel safe talking to his own dad about it. I believe you, I whispered. We'll figure this out together. But even as I said the words, I felt a pit forming in my stomach. Because deep down, I had a feeling this wasn't just about late-night phone calls or locked doors. Something bigger was going on. Something Ethan was still too afraid to say out loud. And later that night, when I passed by James's office and heard the faint click of a lock behind the door, I knew we were only at the beginning of whatever this was. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every shift in the wind outside made my heart jump. I kept replaying Ethan's words in my head, just in case something happens. What was he preparing me for? And why did he seem so sure something bad was coming? The next morning, James acted like nothing was wrong. He made his usual black coffee, kissed my cheek, and asked Ethan how he slept, like everything was perfectly normal. But there was something off. His eyes didn't match his smile. And Ethan? He barely said a word. He kept his head down, poking at his cereal, not even touching his spoon. As soon as James left for work, Ethan looked at me. Can we talk? He asked quietly. We sat in the living room, and he pulled a small notebook from under the cushion. I started writing things down, he said, in case I forget or someone says I'm making stuff up. I opened the notebook and flipped through the pages. There were dates, little notes, times. Some entries were short, like Dad was whispering in the office again at 8:13 p.m. Others were longer, more detailed, descriptions of things James had said, odd things Ethan had overheard, even a rough sketch of a paper he saw on his dad's desk that said something like transfer pending. Transfer? I asked. What kind of transfer? Ethan shook his head. I don't know. But he sounded mad. He kept saying, she can't know. Not yet. I felt a chill go through me. Was James planning something behind my back? A job move? A bank transfer? Something worse? And what did he mean by she can't know? Later that day, I decided to check the office myself. James never let me in there, but with him gone, I figured I could at least look around. The door was locked, of course. But Ethan quietly pulled a small key from his pocket. I found it under the rug, he said. Please don't be mad. I wasn't mad. I was just scared. We unlocked the door together and stepped inside. The room looked normal at first, papers neatly stacked, laptop closed, nothing suspicious out in the open. But then I noticed a drawer half open, almost like it had been left in a rush. Inside were more papers, some bills, old receipts, and then a document labeled Custody Revision Proposal. My heart dropped. It was dated just 2 weeks ago, and it listed Ethan's name. Under guardianship changes, it read, temporary placement to be determined pending evaluation. That didn't make sense. Ethan wasn't going anywhere. Why would James be filling out something like that? Before I could process any of it, we heard a car pull into the driveway. James was home early. Ethan's eyes widened. "Hide it," he whispered. I shoved the document into my sweater and quickly closed the drawer. We barely made it out before the front door opened. James walked in, holding a bag of groceries like everything was fine. "What are you two up to?" he asked, setting the bag down. Ethan smiled weakly. "Just hanging out." But the look James gave me, it lingered. Like he knew we were hiding something. Like this game of pretend was almost over. Dinner that night felt like walking on a tightrope. James sat across from me, making small talk about work, the weather, and a new project he might be starting. He was calm, too calm. Ethan barely touched his plate, and every few minutes, I caught him glancing at me, as if silently asking, "Do we say something? Do we wait?" I wasn't sure myself. My heart pounded the entire time. I could still feel the document folded inside the sleeve of my sweater, hidden in the laundry basket upstairs. Every word James said felt like it was floating above something much darker. I kept nodding, smiling, responding like everything was okay, but inside, I was screaming. When dinner was finally over, Ethan offered to help clear the table. As soon as James stepped into the living room, he leaned close and whispered, "He's watching us." All the time. I didn't know if he meant that literally or if it was just how it felt to him, but I couldn't shake the sensation either. I'd started to notice the way James's eyes lingered longer than they used to, like he was trying to read our minds. Later that night, when everyone was supposed to be asleep, I crept downstairs to get the document. I needed to see it again, to make sure I hadn't imagined what I read. But the laundry basket was empty. I felt a jolt of panic. I checked the pockets of my sweater. Nothing. Then I checked the trash, the hallway, even under the bed. Gone. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, the silence pressing in on me like a weight. That's when I noticed the light in James's office was on. I moved quietly, pressing myself to the wall outside the door. I heard a voice, his voice, but softer, more serious than usual. He was on the phone. "No, she doesn't know yet. I had to take it before she found the rest," he said. A pause. "She's getting suspicious. And the kid, he's been snooping too." I felt my stomach turn. Found the rest? What else was there? Then something crashed inside the office, maybe a chair being pushed back or something falling, and the door swung open. I barely had time to move before James stepped out, still holding his phone. I ducked behind the hallway wall, heart slamming in my chest. He didn't see me. He walked past, heading toward the kitchen. I turned back toward the office and, without thinking, slipped inside. I had seconds, maybe less. I went straight to the drawer. The files were gone. But in their place was a single note, handwritten in James's sharp, neat writing. "Stop looking." My breath caught. I turned to leave, and that's when I saw Ethan standing at the doorway, pale and shaking. "I think he knows," he whispered. And then we both heard it, the sound of the front door locking. From the inside, Ethan and I stood frozen. The sound of that lock echoed through the house like a warning. I grabbed his hand, instinct kicking in. We backed out of the office quietly, trying not to make a sound. James hadn't seen us yet, or at least we hoped he hadn't. My heart was beating so fast it felt like it was in my throat. "Go to your room," I whispered. "Stay there, and don't come out until I tell you." Ethan didn't want to leave. I could see it in his eyes. But he nodded and slipped away up the stairs, quiet as a shadow. I turned off the office light and shut the door behind me, trying to act normal as I walked into the kitchen. James stood there, leaning against the counter, arms crossed. He looked at me with that same calm face, but something in his eyes had changed. There was a sharpness now. A quiet edge. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Couldn't sleep? He asked. I forced a laugh. No. Thought I heard something downstairs. Just checking. He nodded slowly. Funny. I thought I heard something too. He walked past me, opened the fridge, and grabbed a bottle of water like it was any other night. But I could feel it. Something had shifted between us. The warmth was gone. He was watching me now carefully, like he was waiting for me to slip up. I've been thinking, he said casually, twisting the bottle cap. Maybe it's time we take a little trip. Just the three of us. A trip? I asked, forcing my voice to stay even. Yeah, he said, looking straight at me. Somewhere quiet. Maybe off the grid. You know, unplug. Clear our heads. Every alarm in my body went off. James wasn't a spontaneous person. He never suggested things like that. And going off the grid? That wasn't a vacation, it was an escape. What about school? Work? I asked, trying to stall. He shrugged. It's just a few days. Sometimes, families need to get away. Especially when things start to feel tense. He said that last word slowly, like he was testing me. My mouth went dry. He knew. Not everything, maybe, but enough to start circling in. I made it upstairs and found Ethan sitting on his bed, holding his notebook tight to his chest. He said we're going away, I whispered. I don't want to go, he said. Not with him. Something's wrong. I nodded. I know. And we're not going anywhere. Just then, Ethan pulled something out of his notebook, a folded piece of paper I hadn't seen before. I found this in the mailbox today, he said. It wasn't addressed, but I think it's for you. I unfolded it slowly, my hands trembling. It was a printed message, plain and direct. You're not safe. Look under the floorboards in the office. Tell no one. I stared at it, my mind racing. Who had sent this? Was someone else involved? Someone watching us? And worse, what were we about to find buried under that floor? I waited until the house was completely still. James had gone to bed hours ago, and Ethan was pretending to sleep, but I knew neither of us had truly closed our eyes. That note, it haunted me. You're not safe. It confirmed everything I'd feared and raised even more questions. Someone was watching. Someone new. With Ethan keeping watch near the stairs, I slipped back into the office. I kept the lights off and used my phone's flashlight, scanning the floor. At first, nothing stood out. But then I saw it. One plank near the desk was slightly lifted at the edge. My hands were shaking as I pried it up. The wood creaked softly, and I held my breath, listening for any movement upstairs. Silence. Beneath the floorboard was a small metal box, dusty and old. I pulled it out and opened the lid. Inside were papers, dozens of them. Legal forms, custody evaluations, email printouts. But what made my blood run cold was a folder labeled Emergency Guardianship. And inside, my name wasn't listed. Not once. Instead, it named a woman I'd never heard of, Lisa Murray. And taped to the inside was a photo of Ethan with her. He looked younger. Happier. I flipped through the rest. Lisa was Ethan's biological aunt, someone James had never once mentioned. There were letters, too, pleas from her to stay in contact. But James had never replied. Instead, he'd filed to have full guardianship, cutting everyone else out. I heard a sound behind me and turned around. James was standing in the doorway. So you found it, he said quietly. No anger. Just resignation. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. She was going to take him, he said, stepping forward. After his mom died, she thought she had some right to him. I couldn't lose him too. He's not a possession, I snapped. He deserves the truth. James looked down. I was going to tell you. That's what the trip was for. To explain everything. Away from here. Away from anyone else. I didn't believe him. Not anymore. Suddenly, footsteps pounded down the stairs. Ethan burst into the room, holding his notebook. She came, he said breathlessly. There's someone at the door. We rushed to the front. Standing there was a woman with the same eyes as Ethan. Lisa? I asked. She nodded slowly, eyes locked on him. And that's when Ethan whispered, I've seen her before, in my dreams. For a moment, everything just stood still. Lisa stepped inside slowly, eyes filled with emotion as she looked at Ethan. Her voice trembled as she said, You probably don't remember me, but I promised your mom I'd watch over you. I didn't know James had cut me off until I got a call from someone who used to work with him. That's how I knew something wasn't right. Ethan didn't say anything at first. He just stared at her, then quietly stepped forward and hugged her. It was like something inside him relaxed for the first time in weeks. I watched them, trying to piece everything together. Lisa wasn't there to take him away. She was there to give him back something he didn't even know he'd lost: connection, truth, maybe even a bit of peace. James stood at the bottom of the stairs, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't say a word. For the first time, he looked small, defeated. I was wrong, he finally said. I thought I was protecting him. I didn't trust anyone else would. Lisa nodded slowly. You let your fear decide for you. That night, we all sat in the living room and talked about the past, about Ethan's mom, about everything James had kept hidden. There were tears. Some silence. But also relief. Things weren't perfect, and they wouldn't be for a while, but the truth had finally come out. In the days that followed, James agreed to open up the guardianship file again, with input from both Lisa and me. Ethan would stay with us, but now he had someone else in his corner too. Someone who had always been there in the background, just waiting for a chance to be part of his life. As for Ethan, he started smiling more again. Real smiles. The kind that reached his eyes. He even updated the little list he'd made for me, crossing off "Keep secrets away" and adding a new line, "Tell the truth, even when it's hard." I still think about the night I found the floorboard, the letter, the photo, about how close we came to losing the trust we'd built. But more than anything, I think about what Ethan said to me days later, out of nowhere. I meant it, he said, looking up at me. I would do anything to keep you smiling. And this time, I smiled back because I knew we'd finally found our way back to each other.